All right, good afternoon. My name is Turner Bitton. I'm the executive director here at Westview Media. I'd like to thank you for tuning in to the latest event in our City Talk series. Today, we're joined by Mike Brown, Salt Lake City Police Chief. Before I have Chief Brown introduce himself, I'd just like to set a couple of ground rules. The format is such that Chief Brown and myself will be the only ones here on the Zoom. For those that are watching live on Facebook, if you have questions or comments, please feel free to leave them in the chat and we'll get to as many as possible. With that, Chief Brown, I'd like to give you the chance to introduce yourself.
Thank you, Turner, and thank you, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here this afternoon and spend some time with you. My name is Mike Brown. I'm the Chief of Police here in Salt Lake City. I've been Chief since about 2015, so coming up on 6 years. It's a great department, and it's a great department because there are great people here. So I'm happy to be here, and I look forward to the conversation.
Well, thank you. And from my understanding, you came up through the department. So you've been with the department for a long time. Is that correct?
Yeah, I hired on in 1991, May 31st of 1991. So in a few weeks, I'll hit my 30-year mark. So.
Wow, that's exciting. The next question may seem a little bit basic, but I think that understanding what all the Salt Lake City Police Department does is important for folks. So can you just share what all of the responsibilities of the Salt Lake City Police Department are?
How long do we have, Turner?
As long as you need.
We could go for hours, but let's break it down just a little bit as to what police departments do and what our responsibilities are within a community. One of our jobs is to patrol the city, to answer the calls for service, whether they be 911 or 799-3000, where we respond and follow up and do investigations. But in the work that we do, we arrest criminals. If you think about government, we're the only agency within a government that has the right and the powers to make an arrest. So we arrest criminals. In doing so, we reduce crime. One of our charges is to reduce crime, to keep our communities safe. Another one is to reduce the fear of crime, because that's really important. People's perception of what's going on in their community really impacts their quality of life. And so one of our charges is to reduce the fear of crime. And the way we do that, the very best, is working with the community to look for proactive problem-solving models where we can work together with the community to accomplish all those three things before: arrest criminals, reduce crime, reduce the fear of crime, and work with our communities. So
thank you. I think that's really helpful for folks to understand. A little bit of a follow-up question: how large is the Salt Lake City Police Department?
Fully staffed, it's about 570 officers. That includes the airport division, and about 120 civilians or professional staff. So it's just shy of 700. It's not a small organization. It's quite large. It's getting bigger and bigger.
Well, thank you. So I imagine that the police department interacts with a variety of different departments within the city. So can you share how the police department works, say, with the fire department, with the 911 dispatchers, and all the various city departments?
Well, okay. How we work with the other departments, the city, like I say, and I know you've been talking with different directors of different departments within the city. There's a myriad of departments. I mean, everywhere from streets to forest or urbanry. I mean, there's a lot. Finance, all those different things. But really, the trifecta of public safety is police, fire, and 911. And so when calls come in, and some people don't realize, 911 is a separate department within the city. It's headed up by Lisa Burnett, who is the department head. And the calls will come in, and they'll be triaged in dispatch, and then they'll be dispatched out to fire or EMS or police. And so then they come to us. And then fire and police, we work hand in glove on so many different types of calls. If somebody's hurt or injured, they'll be dispatched as well as we are. And then there are many times they'll go on a call that they'll find out that there is a criminal intent or a criminal aspect to it, and they'll call us in and vice versa. So we work, our fire department, brothers and sisters, our our dispatchers, we work hand in glove, forming that public safety element here in Salt Lake City. But you'd be surprised, Salt Lake City, we're always trying to think outside the box, how we can work with other agencies and other departments to really have an impact in Salt Lake City. And one that kind of comes to mind is, and I think we've talked about this before, street racing, right? I know right now there tends to be some problems with street racing out in the west part of the city on some of those industrial streets. Well, it's really hard sometimes to go out as 2 or 3 officers and impact 200 or 300 street racers. You have to catch, the individuals actually racing at the time. And if you write a citation, how does that impact the other 200 or 300 that may go somewhere else and just continue on with that nefarious activity? So we got with our street departments, friends, and we looked at putting out, those big steel plates that you put in the roads. They'd probably weigh a couple 100 tons, or not 100 tons, but a couple tons. They're heavy. They're just about 1 inch high. But if people are driving 20 miles an hour, 25 miles an hour on the streets, which they should, no problem. But if you're doing, in excess of 30, 40, 50 miles an hour, it's problematic. So we get with streets and we find those areas in which they really like to street race, and it's impacting the businesses out there. And we put those plates out to inhibit that. And I'm telling you, it works very well. So, I mean, that's kind of thinking outside the box and working with another department within the city. We also last year put together a park ranger squad. One sergeant, 5 officers. No, 1 sergeant, 4 officers. I got that right? I'll figure it out. Anyway, but that whole team, their whole goal is to work within the network of parks in the city, and spend time and make sure that we handle the calls for service in there, make sure that people feel safe and secure in going to the parks. And so, again, that's working with public services and parks to figure out the concerns that they have, and then back and forth sharing the responsibilities to making sure the parks are safe here in Salt Lake City. And then, boy, another one is the mayor's community commitment program, where we try to go out and work with those that are experiencing homelessness. And that is a whole system of different departments in the city, working with housing and neighborhood development to work with them to bring in nonprofits, DOA, and some of these other service providers. Salt Lake City has a network of 10 social workers. So to go out and try to work with those that are experiencing homelessness, really to help them connect the dots, to whatever they may need, whether it's housing, vouchers, temporary housing, IDs. There are so many things that inhibit people from getting a leg up and out of housing or out of homelessness. So we work very hard to do that. So the police department is no more just the facts. This is what we do. We just stay in our lane and work on crime. We really have broadened the beam, so to speak, and work with many departments here in the city to impact the quality of life, make the quality of life better for all the people that live here. Kind of a long answer. Sorry, Turner.
No, that's great. I really appreciate the depth that you went into. I'm going to come back to some of the things that you mentioned, but
okay.
My next question, I'm going to go, I guess, a little bit of a bigger view, but what do you think is the most important thing for folks who are watching this to take away about the police department?
All right. This police department is one of the oldest in the country. People don't realize that. This department was founded on March 10th of 1851, when the mayor was given permission to form a police department. We hired 40 officers and we paid them 25 cents an hour. Now, since then we've grown, but this police department is very progressive. It's very forward thinking. We're always looking for better ways to serve the community and do it involving the community. We don't want to be here in the city to police the city and those that live here. We want to work with them. We want to be a part of the community and part of the city, working together to make sure that they feel safe and they have the quality of life that they want and need here.
Well, thank you. My next question, you've mentioned the progressive nature of the police department here, and just wondering what types of projects or priorities that you're working on as a department right
One of the biggest projects, and I guess it's really the forward-thinking aspect of this department, is to really look at how we can provide services to those that are suffering from addiction, those that are suffering from homelessness and mental health issues. Because at the end of the day, many times when people are in need or their problems and concerns, they call the police department. And if you really think about it, homelessness, addiction, mental health, none of those are crimes. They really aren't. And so we have been working for many years to figure out how we can help and not arrest the problem. And it was a few years ago, I remember that we started the Community Connection Center, and we hired, I think, 6 social workers at that time. And I remember there were a lot of naysayers basically saying, Chief, you're crazy. What are you doing? You put social workers within the police department, people aren't going to come to see you. And we opened up the little shop down there on 5th West and 2nd South. And again, no one's coming. I tell you, we opened the door and turned on the lights, and people came. They really did. People need help. And as a police department, in looking at ways that we can better the service that we provide, that has changed our perspective in trying to help our communities. It's grown. We now have 10 social workers. We've developed into, following up back in 2016, many people that were experiencing homelessness were down on the 5th West Island down there. Remember that area? It was tough. But a lot of people they would walk in and seek the help we needed. But after Operation Rio Grande, there were a lot of people that moved out of that area into the different communities of Salt Lake City. And so we formed what we call a co-responder model, where we take one of our officers assigned and trained in the CIT Academy, and we partner them with a social worker. And they go out into these encampments in different areas and take the services to those in need. And really, that has been kind of the cutting edge, not kind of the cutting edge, that is the cutting edge in what law enforcement and social workers are doing across the country. We're a learning site for the Department of Justice. So a lot of agencies will be directed to Salt Lake City to see what we're doing and how we're doing it. And so I'm very, very proud of that project and where it's going. We've had a lot of discussions with the Racial Equity Police Commission. And in talking with them, they would really like to see us expand that model. And I really think that is the future. I can see a point in time where we put officers and social workers, because there are certain calls that we should be going with social workers to really to help, to de-escalate, and then try to help people get those services they're looking for. We're thinking outside the box. We recently put one of our social workers, in fact, Jessica Waters, she's the director. We put her on our SWAT team, our hostage negotiation team. And we had a situation just a month ago where we had an individual that had barricaded themselves in a mobile home. And it was after many, many hours of talking, we really weren't getting anywhere. And so Jessica showed up, and through, her experience and her skills, she was able to talk this whole situation down to a very successful resolution where the individual just came up and surrendered. So I really think that is where policing is going. What we need to be, that's how we're going to serve our communities better. And so I'm proud of that. And that's where I would like to build and focus more of our efforts and time going forward.
Well, I really appreciate that. And I just want to flag for folks that are watching, we actually sat down with Jessica on Tuesday, and she talked about how transformative her role has been within the police department.
She's amazing, isn't she?
She is, and the co-responder model is, to me, is absolutely fascinating. So
yeah.
Kudos on that. The next question I have is, we discussed some projects and priorities, but I'm wondering if there are anything happening specifically on the west side with the police department.
Yes, there was about a week ago. Do you remember the press conference where we talked about expanding the ambassador program
Mhm.
onto the North Temple corridor? Well, that's big because we're bringing in more eyes and ears for the police department, more people that are out and about partnering with us, helping us to to help those that may be in need, to report crime, to call us, and to work some of those areas. But a few years ago, we actually, at one time, we only had 3 bike squads. We had a Liberty and we had a downtown bike squad, 2 bike squads. And we've expanded it to a park squad and now a pioneer division, or well, a pioneer bike squad. And so the west side actually has its own bike squad of 1 sergeant, 5 officers. And that's what I'm going back to correct my answer before. It was one sergeant and 5 for the park squad. So but yeah, there is a pioneer bike squad, and I want you to know that group is they work and they're very effective in what they do. Since January 1st to just a few weeks ago, they have arrested 86 individuals on felony charges. They've seized 10 firearms. They have recovered 9 occupied stolen vehicles. They had seized over $4,000 in money, and they have taken off the streets of those areas 2,000 grams of illegal narcotics. And so they're doing great work every day. And what's really nice is there's a Pioneer, there's a Central or downtown, and a Liberty. They work different days with different different times and different days off, but they really they augment each other as they work, the different areas within the city. So the west side of Salt Lake City should be very proud of that bike squad and what they're doing. They do great work.
They do, and they're in hot demand all the time. I know that the various communities on the west side, Glendale included, where I live, are constantly asking for more bike squad time.
Yeah.
I'm gonna
Another Turner, before we go to the next one, let me give you another one. We have a gang squad, and it has 6 gang detectives. There are 4 street detectives, and then 2 full-time detectives that actually do the follow-up and screen charges here at the department and do the investigations. Well, that's just not enough. I mean, recently, I think we all know that there's been a spike in drive-by shootings. And so we have now put together a collateral gang squad where there are members of patrol that partner with the gang detectives and go out as a team. And so there are now 6 gang detectives, but there are now 13 gang collaterals. So we've really used our patrol officers as a force multiplier in what we're doing on the west side or across the city. And that has really helped us out in curbing some of these crimes and catching some of these people that are causing such, that are doing drive-bys and instilling fear in our communities. It's not right. And they're doing great work to arrest them.
Well, thank you. And that is a little bit of a good segue. There, from my understanding, the city is collaborating with the U.S. Attorney's Office to address some larger crimes. Can you talk about that program a little bit?
Yeah, it's kind of we kicked this off 1st of January because over the last year, not only here in Salt Lake City, but across the country, a lot of cities, most cities saw an increase in violent crime. And so with a lot of some of the difficulties we were having with being able to arrest individuals, put them in jail, prosecute them, because the criminal justice with COVID and everything that was going on had kind of slowed to a crawl. And what we had done is got with, at the time, it was U.S. Attorney John Huber, and talked with him about partnering and bringing not only his team, but the state, the Commissioner Jess Anderson, Sheriff Rosie Rivera, the U.S. Marshals, Matt Harris, and bringing them all together to really focus the beam on those individuals, those apex criminals that are causing so much angst in our city and committing these violent crimes. Just to give you a perspective, in the 60s, they did a lot of studies on violent crime, and they found that 5 to 8% of the criminals were responsible for about 50% of the crime. And they were those apex criminals because they don't just, they're committing crime all across our communities. And so if we can arrest those individuals, it'll have a huge impact in what we're doing in our the crime in our community. And we have, I mean, over the last several months, we've arrested a number of defendants. We've seized well over 30 guns. We're making an impact, and it's just the start. And what I want is, I want those people that feel like there are no recourse or for their actions to know that there will be, and we will hold you accountable through this new process. But it's been a good program, and it really shows the teamwork of all our partners here in Salt Lake City.
Well, I appreciate that. And I'm going to give you a break for just a second, because I've
Okay.
asked a bunch of questions in rapid succession. And just remind folks who are watching live, if you have questions for the chief, please submit them in the chat and we'll get to as many as we can. I'm going to zoom us out a little bit up to about 10,000 feet.
Okay.
I'd just like to ask what your general approach or philosophy is as the police chief.
My general philosophy, when I took over as the chief of police in 2015, it was kind of on the heels of Ferguson and everything that was happening in our country. There was Ferguson, then there was the things that happened in Baltimore, then New York and Chicago. And I knew that we as a police department couldn't do this job without the help of our community. And I called up Pastor or Reverend Davis of the Calvary Baptist Church, and I got an appointment to go see him. And I went, and I know Pastor Davis, but I went down in an official capacity, and he was very kind to oblige me with a meeting. And I remember that like it was yesterday. I walked in and I sat in a large room at his conference table, and we exchanged pleasantries and had a nice conversation. And I said, Reverend Davis, I'm the new chief here in town, and I really would like to form a relationship and build those partnerships because we need you. As only Pastor Davis can do, he kind of sat up in his chair, and he wears glasses, and so he looked over the top of his glasses, and he looked down at me, and he said, he didn't look down at me, he looked at me, square in the face, and he said, Chief, we've been here for 42 years. Where have you been? And within that short one sentence, that was a sermon. And it resonated with me, and it still does today. One of my biggest philosophies is we can't do this alone. We have to partner with the communities. We have to work together. And like I say, we don't want to just police the city. We want to work with the community and police our communities how they want us to police. But partnerships will help us reduce crime. It'll build trust, and it'll really take our police department and our communities where we want it to be. So, I mean, that little story, and I share it quite often, but that really had an impact on me as a chief. And it showed me how important it was to build those partnerships. And it can't be one and done. Many times think, oh, well, we have that relationship now. You can't just check the box and say, oh, we're good there, or we're good here. You've got to go back, and you've got to establish and build upon, those relationships, because it's not one and done. It takes time and it takes effort. And so that's kind of my philosophy. We'll do everything we can to serve our community, to answer those calls for service, but we do it better when we partner with the communities we serve.
Well, I really appreciate that. And I have a couple of follow-ups. You mentioned earlier the Commission on Racial Equity in Policing, and just wondering if you could talk a little bit about what that process is and kind of how it has worked with the police department as the commission has done its work.
Well, it was last year, and I don't remember the month because the months of last year kind of all blur together. That was one heck of a month for law enforcement, but the commission was put together by the mayor and city council and given a charge to review policing in Salt Lake City. And it's made of commissioners from all the communities that we serve. And these are leaders within the communities. And we meet and we talk, and they discuss, and they ask for information, and we share it, and we talk and we discuss, and they ask, probing questions. And why do you do it this way? Couldn't you do this? Have you looked at it through this lens? And so it really has been a good, let me just say, conversation. And at the end of this conversation, I think we're going to get some really good suggestions that have come out of from the Racial Equity Police Commission. We already have. We really have. We've talked about CIT training and how important it is. And I know that the commission's going to come forward and say, we want CIT training for all the officers in the Salt Lake City Police Department. And for your listeners, CIT is crisis intervention training. It's a 40-hour course that we put our new recruits through, but there are some that haven't kept up with the certifications or recertifications, and then some of the lateral hires that we've brought in didn't get the initial training. So we're now going back and we're hosting 5 academies to make sure that we get everybody through that training and everybody recertified, because this is a tool that we need, or a skill that we need to be able to recognize maybe somebody that's having, a mental health crisis. Look, people don't call us on their best days. Usually they don't call us on their birthdays. It's when things have gone awry, and we have to show up. And if we can better, if we can recognize and have those skill sets to de-escalate and to help, it really makes our job better, and the outcome so much better for everybody.
Thank you. My next question kind of builds on that. The city recently received a sensory inclusion recognition, and I'm wondering if you could talk about that process.
Yeah, that's called Culture City, and we're the first, not just law enforcement, because there are a lot of law enforcement agencies that have been through it, but we're the first public safety group, so fire, EMS, 911, and police, to complete this training. And it's sensory inclusive training. So we're now certified. It's those with sensory needs, and it really gives us, again, those skills and that training that we can respond on these calls and understand from going through the training. You really look at it from those that maybe that have those sensory needs, what bright lights do, or maybe loud noises, or crowds. Many times crowds really impact people. And so to really recognize it, and then to de-escalate it and provide the service that we should be, so that at the end, we all have a good outcome. And it's been a fantastic. I mean, Joe Ingles, we all know who Joe is. He called, we had some conversations last fall, and I know it's important to him. And so when Big Joe Ingles calls you at 6'8" and says, "Hey, I want to partner with you," who am I to say no? But we wanted to do this. And so Joe and his wife, Renee, have been a big part of bringing this to Salt Lake City. And in December, we finished the training. About 98% of the departments are now trained. And that's a huge milestone for public safety, especially here in Salt Lake City. So very proud of that.
Thank you. And to build on that a little bit, I'm wondering if you could share what the process is for an officer-involved shooting. I think it's important for folks to understand how the process works when there is, an officer-involved critical incident, and then specifically the Civilian Review Board. And I should disclose that I actually sit on the city's Civilian Review Board, so I may be a little biased in favor of the work of the Civilian Review Board, but
maybe I should ask you that question, Turner.
Wondering if you could talk about that process a little bit.
Well, when we do have an officer-involved shooting, there are 3 reviews, or maybe 4 reviews. We have a call-out team. We call it an OICI team, Officer Involved Critical Incident. And there are 3 teams, actually 4 teams here in Salt Lake City. We have one made up of our detectives. Unified PD has one, West Valley has one, and now there is a 4th team made up of some of the smaller agencies here in the Valley. But what that does is, you don't ever want to investigate yourself. So to be unbiased, so that we don't have any biases, that we want to be open and transparent. If we are involved in an officer-involved shooting, we'll call one of those outside teams and bring them in. And they will come in and handle the entire investigation from the very start, through all the interviews, the collection of evidence, Um, they'll review the video, download the video, they'll do all of that. And then they take what they found in their investigation to Sim Gill, District Attorney Sim Gill, and they'll screen that with him. And then Sim will pour over that information, and he'll make a determination on whether it was justified. So the district attorney will look at it through the lens of through the criminal aspect. Internally, we will do an internal affairs audit where we'll look at policies. That's what internal affairs does. It looks at policies to see if they're violated. And then the CRB, Turner, which you're part of, they will also, they have full access to the interviews that we have in internal affairs, and they'll take that information, and maybe you could explain a little bit, but because I've never sat in that, because we do want that separation, we really do. And you guys will actually take that information and look through it and review the interviews and the evidence, and then you'll make a determination. But a lot of times there's a few other things we do is that we'll bring in our training squad, and we'll walk them through what has occurred, because there are lessons to be learned. There are things that we can take back and we can incorporate into our quarterly training, lessons learned, so that if you're going to be a progressive organization, look at how you can be better. And we're always trying to do that. So those are really 4 different aspects of an officer involved shooting. If you want to talk a little about CRB, that might be helpful for everybody.
I think I'll skip that for now. I don't know if I'm the best person to explain the process.
Okay.
The next question I have is on the subject of camp removals. And I think it's important for the public to know what process is followed for the cleanup of camps. I know that it's not initiated by Salt Lake City Police Department. It's actually initiated through a different mechanism, and wondering if you could speak to that.
Yeah, the community connection program that we have is made up of the health department. They're part of this. The county plays a big role in it. Salt Lake City, HAND, the PD, fire. But we get together and we talk about some of the encampments that grow in size and the impact they're having in our communities, because they do. But the goal from the very start is to bask these encampments with services and to see how we can help people. And so the Community Connection Center, our social workers, they go out day after day to see if we can connect people into services to help them. VOA is another partner of ours. The Legal Defenders Office has a service team that goes out with this. So there are a lot of different teams that go out for, I don't know, sometimes several weeks to see if we can help people out of those circumstances. And they do. A lot of people do accept our help. And so, but then at some point, the health department will come in and post the encampment as being illegal and ask for it to be relocated or moved on. And so through the authority of the health department, that is done. The only role that the Salt Lake City Police Department has is safety and security. We want to make sure that the health department and Advantage Services and those that actually come in to do the work and to pick up the trash and different things like that, that they can do it safely. And so that's kind of condensed down, but that's the process of the CCP. But really, people need to understand it. The foundation of it is to really help people. Another partner I forgot to mention the courts. The courts will come out. Judge Landau and his team will come out to make sure they can help people, because sometimes people have minor warrants or charges that they can get those dismissed, or they can get an abeyance on them, because sometimes those are a hindrance or a hurdle to them getting services that they need. So it's collectively, it's a teamwork. It's several teams working hard to help those that are experiencing homelessness in our community.
Thank you. And from what I understand, the camp cleanup process has resulted in a lot of overtime for officers, and there's a question of whether to increase that budget. Can you just speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, we've asked for some, we have we do a lot of it with, we do it some with our officers that are on duty. But if we pull, sometimes it takes 30, 40, some of the large encampments take quite a few officers. If we pulled everybody in on a day shift, there would be nobody to handle the 911 calls or the calls for service. And so we have to schedule those with overtime. And so that is out of necessity. That's what we have to do. So I think it's important to have to make sure that the health department is safe to do their work. There have been, I know of a couple, at least one time when they've had to abort their operation because they were being verbally challenged and harassed, and they didn't feel safe in doing their relocation. So they had to postpone it and move on. So we just want to make sure that they can do their work safely. So I do think it's important to have that money and that overtime, and that's what it's used for.
Thank you. I just want to give you a chance to talk about that.
Yes.
Another question, and this is related to Operation Rio Grande, and I just received this as a question, and I'm paraphrasing, so I hope that I do the question justice. But when you were talking about the new operation on North Temple, you had mentioned focusing on apex criminals, I believe. But one of the criticisms of Operation Rio Grande was that it impacted folks at a lower level of crime. And just wondering if you can speak to how the approach on North Temple will be different or similar to what happened with Operation Rio Grande. And I recognize that Operation Rio Grande was primarily a state effort, but wanted to just ask you that question.
Well, some of the lower, I mean, the difference is that Operation Rio Grande had a starting and an end. Salt Lake City, we started with our social workers in 2016. I don't think it's ever going to end. I think this is the way we're going to police our city. And so one of the biggest components of what we do is try not to, we don't want to have to arrest our way. We're never going to arrest our way out of mental health issues and addiction. We're just not going to. But so if we can intervene with our social workers and get them into the process, that helps. The lower level crimes, many times they'll just be issued a citation and they'll go to Judge Baxter or the homeless court, where they can really, the judge and his staff can look at what really can help an individual, because to arrest somebody and then fine them $200 or $300 where they don't have the means to pay that's not going to help anything. So really it would be an opportunity to ask an individual, what as a community, what can we do to help you? So I really think that is kind of our goal and what we're trying to do, but if people are out there carrying guns, if they're selling narcotics, dope in our community, we're not going to tolerate that. And those are the individuals that we're going to book into jail, and we want to hold them accountable. That is not acceptable in Salt Lake City. So I think that's kind of the balance that we're trying to do. I mean, just to give you a perspective, I remember several years ago, well, like I said, I've been doing this 30 years, kind of the mindset was that those that were buying dope or selling dope, we'd go down to Pioneer Park. As many people remember when Pioneer Park was going through a rough time, where we would go in and arrest quite a few people for possession of narcotics. At the time was a 3rd-degree felony. And then we'd take out our laser guns and we'd shoot the steeple of the Greek Orthodox Church. And we would enhance a 3rd-degree felony to a 2nd-degree felony and then take them to jail, thinking that we had fixed the problem. Really, we had exacerbated the problem, because now somebody had a 2nd-degree felony on their criminal history. And how are they going to be a productive member of our community with that hanging over their head? So really, collectively over the years, we've really looked at there's been a whole paradigm shift as to how we look at the issues of addiction and mental health. And like I say, we can never arrest our way out of this problem. We're going to have to work with our community and with our service providers in kind of a healing aspect and a movement.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that perspective. My next question, this kind of shifts topics a little bit, but from my understanding, we're down quite a few officers and you are actively recruiting new officers. So just wondering what type of qualifications and who are you looking for to come and be a police officer in Salt Lake City?
Well, Turner, we're down 32 officers right now. We have 26 that we hired in January, and they're in our academy. We had 8 that we just put into FTO. But here's the thing, people think, well, you're down officers, why don't you just hire? Here's kind of the linchpin to that, is that once you get them hired, you have to put them through a state certified post academy. That is, I believe 22 weeks. And then once they get out of that, you put them into an FTO program. That's a field training officer program where they ride with an experienced officer and go on a lot of different calls so they can learn kind of through example and mentoring. But that takes about 10 months. So if you hire today, you won't see that officer on the street for 10 months. So we're hiring. We're looking at possibly bringing in some lateral officers from other agencies, but we don't just want officers to fill those seats. We want the right officers. And so Salt Lake City, and this has been another concern of the REP, we call it the REP, it's the Racial Equity Policing Commission, is that we want to hire the best officers, and we want to hire them and make sure that they have the skill set to police the city that the community wants them to hire. And so just recently, when we were hiring those 26, I had the opportunity to interview a few of them. And I asked that very question. I said, given everything that's happened in 2020, why do you want to be a police officer now? And why in Salt Lake City? And that's a tough question. But I'll tell you, these young people, their answer was astounding. They basically said, look, I can sit at home on the couch, look at the TV, scream and yell and be discontent and angry at the world. Or I can get up and I can put my money where my mouth is and go make things better. And that's what they wanted to do. And there are a lot of young people with that type of charge that want to get into law enforcement for all the very right reasons. And those are the individuals that we want to serve here in Salt Lake City.
Thank you. And just a little bit of a follow-up on that. Policing can be a very emotional and very difficult job. And I'm wondering what type of support you're able to provide to each individual officer within the department.
Okay, these are good questions, Turner. These are really good questions. Look, I keep going back to 2020, tough year. Here in Salt Lake City, we had over 300 different events of protests and different things that we staffed. And it was tough. And it was tough because a lot of them were aimed and directed at law enforcement. So officers dealt with that. They did it admirably. They did a great job. But everything in a police career has an impact. The military taught us that PTSD is real and that people come back from war and the things that they've seen and had to do will make a difference. Well, a lot of the things that happen in law enforcement are the very same. But in law enforcement for many years, it was kind of, nobody really wanted to talk about it. It wasn't, you never wanted to expose your Achilles heel, so to speak, that you were struggling with, maybe a call that you went on or something like that. Well, that whole paradigm is shifted. It's okay to say you're not okay now. And so officer wellness is a big issue here in law enforcement, not only here in Salt Lake City, but across the country. We have a peer support team where officers can reach out and they can seek help. We're also, in our budget that we put forward to Mayor Mendenhall, was to get a full-time clinician, a therapist in the department, to walk the halls, to go to lineups, to talk to officers, so that they have that conduit to somebody they can talk to, and then into whatever help they may need. Because it's tough. It's a tough job, and it does have an impact. And if we can't provide that services if we can't give them some services to lean on, it's going to get worse. And so I have heard from several officers that have had the opportunity to speak to a therapist that it's really changed their life again. It has rejuvenated their career, and they feel much better in what they're doing. So it's a big thing for the Salt Lake City Police Department, but it's a huge thing for Mayor Mendenhall. She supports it very much.
Well, thank you very much. And we're running toward the end of our time. So I like to end on a positive note. Can you tell me, a story of success or something inspirational that's happened that kind of keeps you going in your position?
I wish I could hang my hat on one story, Turner, but there are so many. But I want to talk to one. What I'm really proud about is how this police department, what the women and men of this department do every day, and what they, the compassion that they show. I mean, we have 5 core values: character, compassion, commitment to the community, courage, and communication. And I want you to know that they embody those core values every day, and with a mindset of service, and not so much just to arrest people. They want to help people, and the impact that's having in our community. I have a short story I want to just read to you real quick, because I can't remember all the details, but how the work they have done through the Community Connection Center, through our social workers, has paid off. And this is just one of probably hundreds of stories that are out there and happen. We had an individual, and we'll call her Jane Doe. She was a 42-year-old female. She was identified as a high utilizer during the emergency service. She was a high utilizer of emergency service providers. Between 2013 and 2016, Jane was involved in over 70 police-related events. She had 69 emergency room visits, over 354 non-emergency related visits to hospitals or doctors, and over 1,000 notes in the hospital system. The estimated total cost for Jane's police and medical encounters was calculated to be over $248,000, almost $250,000. With the case management and intervention of our social workers, Jane was eventually placed on the wait list for the Utah State Hospital. While receiving treatment, Jane voluntarily decided to go to a long-term care center. She has not used any emergency medical services or called for first responders assistance since being placed into a care facility. That's a success. That's a success here in Salt Lake City, and that's what we're trying to do every day. The first thing, we're not always looking to arrest people. We're trying here, we want to be guardians and caretakers and provide the service to our communities that they expect. And that's just one of many stories that happen every day here in Salt Lake City.
Well, I appreciate that, Chief. And my last question for you before we wrap up is there any question I should have asked you today that I didn't ask you?
Well, I guess the question would be, why is the Salt Lake City Police Department great? No, it's because of the people we have. It's because of the officers, the women and men. That serve here. They are outstanding. They are the best. And I'm sorry, I get a little emotional.
It's okay.
They are the best, and they come to work every day. They put on this uniform, they don that badge, and they go out to serve, and they do it with compassion and character and commitment to this community. And that's why this is a great organization.
Well,
So thank you, Turner.
yeah, I appreciate that. And I just want to thank you for your service as police chief. And I don't see any additional audience questions, so we're going to go ahead and wrap up the live stream. But I really appreciate your time today, Chief. Thank you so much.
Turner, as always, it's good to talk with you. Thank you.
Yep, you take care. Thank you.
Take care. Bye-bye.